this meeting with the creative investing. We basically did that because we did a survey, and that survey really led us to uh, put on the things that we have from a general meeting perspective. So one of the things that we'd like to do is ask people to, basically we'll do some more surveys, and we'll like to get your input as we move forward, because that input basically tells us what it is that we will be doing. So um, take the time, and you'll see some of those things coming again, and give us your thoughts and input. So back to the creative deal making. Um, One of the things we want to do is, we're on this platform that is a little bit different than the in-place learning and approach that we've taken over the past many years. So I want to sort of get the audience involved. And so I'm going to start off with a question here. And it's basic. Why do you think we should be discussing creative deal making? And so you can raise your hand, or you could just provide us your input, and then we'll sort of start from there and go through some of the reasons why this is an important topic to actually be talking about or discussing. Wait a minute now, we got to have a couple of people, right?
Well, I'll say that for me, I think creative would be getting something other than conventional financing. So I just bought one house and put 25% down plus closing costs, and that was all fine. But can't do that again. Need to find a different way.
Yeah, I mean, certainly that's a great answer. It does fit more with what we've talked about from the standpoint of private lending. I mean, because clearly private lending, if you look at how you're going to fund a project, would be a creative way of doing that. And I was actually thinking about that as one of the things that if you look at private lending, then from a funding standpoint, it is a creative solution to that. So let me give folks a little bit of an idea. Basically, when a seller comes to us, we are being really asked to be the provider of the solutions. So, I mean, that's one of the benefits. And I'm not gonna, I have a couple of things that I've thought of, and I'm gonna really force it on the audience a little bit, because I really think it makes a big difference if people sort of talk about what it is that they would be looking for this session, and what it is they want to get out of it. Let me be a little bit more complete with my sentence and direct. So I mean, as a person who have customers, and we're trying to provide solutions, then it helps if we have more strategies and approaches as to how we would do things. Because if we have more approaches and more strategies, that means that we can provide more solutions to address whatever the issue is that the customer, and that being the seller in most situations, is coming to us to actually solve. So I guess what I would do is let me just give you another example. I mean, it's great. I mean, one of the things that happens, let me put it this way. And one of the things that happens is, in a lot of cases, the seller will come to you and they'll ask for, well, how are you going to help me? What is it that you can do? And a lot of people, what they do, and a lot of people who are the solution providers, what they do is they actually give the seller more than one solution. So that means having a broad list of strategies and approaches allows you to be able to do that. So So it's basically good to have options that you can give the seller. They may say, okay, I have this house, and then once they have the house, then they'll say, okay, uh, I want to sell it for X number of dollars, and you would say, okay, well, what if we do this, this, or this? And so when we go through this particular session, at the end of the session, we hope we'll be at a point where you have a little bit of a different idea about maybe some of the things you can do. At the very least, it would challenge you to look at things. So, what do we mean when we say creative? So, the guys who know me, they would say, well, that Leon, he's a little bit analytical with some of the things he does, you know. And so one of the things I did was I said, well, let me take a quick look at Webster's dictionary and see what it actually says. And I looked and it had like three different definitions. And I said, well, I really want definition 3 because it really fits. So definition 3 for creative says managed so as to get around legal and conventional limitations. And I thought that was, wow, that one really, really fits. Um, and because, you know, it fits with uh, the example where um, we talked about the private lending, because for most people, private lending is not a solution in their funding space. But if you're a real estate investor, you may not know about it when you first come out, first start off. But what happens is you get to a point where you really begin to roll and you say, how can I do more projects? How can I do more things? And that would be to utilize private lending. And that was part of our discussion in January. So uh, today, what we're going to do is we're actually going to go through and we're going to talk about uh, maybe 4 or 5 approaches that we've used in the past, we being folks that's been around for a while, like Carl and myself. And we're going to go through and we're going to talk about uh, mortgage assumption, going to talk about subject to seller financing. We're also going to talk about something that's called a master lease option. And we're going to talk about short sales, things of that sort, to have you have a different view of maybe what some of the solutions are. Some of those things are old things, but short sales probably were not prevalent and were not in that much of an existence until you got into the 90s. So things are constantly changing, and it helps us all if we understand what some of those strategies are. One of the things also, there may be people in the audience who have a specific item that maybe is a little bit different. And if you want us to discuss that or you want to talk about it yourself, we have a pretty open and free forum here. So don't hesitate to interrupt us. And it's not really an interruption, that's probably the wrong word. It's really more of a open discussion around how we might do things and how we might help each other. So um, one of our panelists is Steve Peterson, and as you know, he is, as Andy talked about earlier, the attorney that Freedom First used when it first got started. And we would have to go back many, many years, certainly into the early 2000s. And he has been one of our go-to attorneys when it comes to looking at how you would do real estate transactions that a lot of attorneys would say to you, no, you can't do that. That can't be done. It doesn't make any sense. And that's Leon's words. And I know sometimes people sort of say, well, boy, he's been sort of specific there, but that is the way it is. So one of the things I want to do is I want to ask Steve, given the 5 or 6 things we just talked about, what is it that you would be concerned about if someone came to you and they said, hey, Steve, I'm going to be doing one of these particular items, and any one of those 5 things, what would be the first thing that you would look at to sort of say, okay, this is something good, or this is something that I have some concerns about?
Well, it very much depends on whether or not I'm representing the buyer or the seller. All of your categories are extremely positive when it comes to representing the buyer. It's when you're representing the seller that you have problems, and finding an attorney to represent the seller that will allow a seller to sign under some of these circumstances is really the open question. Mortgage assumption and subject to financing are very similar items. And a mortgage assumption, the person buying the property actually assumes the mortgage. Assuming the mortgage means that the person is agreeing that they are in fact going to pay the mortgage, and if they don't pay the mortgage, they can be sued by the seller. So there are 2 different kinds of assumptions. There are assumptions where the bank approves of the assumption, and there are assumptions where the bank does not approve of the assumption. If you can get the bank to approve of the assumption, then the deal is fantastic for both the buyer and the seller. You just have to make sure that the bank allows the seller off the hook if that takes place. FHA mortgages, for instance, are assumable with the bank and FHA's approval if the buyer has good credit. And under those circumstances, you would ask that the seller be released from the mortgage obligation. The seller wants to be released because they don't want it to be on their credit report when they apply for the second house mortgage, that the new bank says, well, we can't give it to you because you have the mortgage on the house that you already sold. Subject to is similar. In subject to, though, the buyer doesn't actually sign anything agreeing that he's going to pay the mortgage. He just takes the property subject to that mortgage. So what's the downside? The downside is if you represent the seller, the attorney for the seller is going to be extremely nervous that the buyer is going to miss mortgage payments. And if the buyer misses mortgage payments, the seller's credit will be ruined. So that's really the biggest question. So it goes to whether or not the property sale is, how distressed is it on behalf of the seller? Does the seller need to get rid of the property? Is the seller ill? Are there reasons why you can talk an attorney into allowing an assumption or a subject to, notwithstanding the risks to the seller?
Okay. So, I mean, I think any questions from anyone? I mean, we'll give you a chance to raise your hand or speak up. So what we want to do now is sort of go through each one of the items we talked about and have our panelists talk a bit about some of their experience, some of the things they've done in the past, give you some examples, if you will, of the things that they've done in the categories that we have. So we'll probably go through each one of them in order. There's no fixed way of going through it that we have to adhere to. So if you got questions or you want to switch up things, don't hesitate to let us know. One of the things that Steve will do is, as we're going through these areas, if he has some area that he feels a little bit of consternation, for sake of better words, we'll let him interject and tell us where it is that he has his concerns. And so let's do that. And let's start off. I think Joe McGuire got back on the call, correct?
Yeah, he's on. He's here.
Yeah. Yeah. So what we'll do is we'll start off and let's start off with the mortgage assumption. Joe, if you can and feel comfortable, can you give us a little bit of example and maybe some of the things that you've done in that space?
Yeah, sure. And I'm much better in a conversation than a presentation. So, you know, ask questions or talk or something. But no, yeah, one of the first deals I did was an assumption, and it was, I remember the deal. It was a thriving megalopolis south of Buffalo, and turned out that the water down there pipes must be gold, I guess. I mean, very expensive. House had gravity heat, which you don't see a lot of anymore. But in any case, I bought the property on an assumption. And, you know, that part's fine. That was, you know, it's easy. You bought the house.
So was that a bank or a private assumption?
Yeah, it was a bank.
Okay.
Did the bank approve of the assumption?
I don't know that they were ever aware of it, frankly.
Joe's talking about subject 2 now.
No, I'm talking assumption. I assumed it.
All right.
Absolutely, I assumed it. But in any case, long story short, I was doing rehab, and I was there on it was either a Friday or Saturday night, about 9 or 10 o'clock at night, trying to put down tile in the bathroom, and decided that, or realized that I am not good with a hammer. I'm, you know, pretty good with a pen, but trying to put a house back together was not my strong suit. So I canceled that, left, and found a couple of realtors and put it on the market. And the realtors were saying, "Oh, this is a great house, but you know, get all this money for it." And you know, it didn't sell and didn't sell. And I was going, I'm telling them, the trick to the sale of the house is the financing. It's assumable. I assume that I will sell it on an assumption. Don't talk about the pretty bathroom and the way the house can be. It's the financing. The value of property is the money. It's the financing. So they messed around with it for a few months, and finally they came up with a bright idea of listening to me and advertised it as an assumption. Contractor who wanted to live there bought it. He fixed it up. I carried the second, and everybody was happy. I mean, he had his house, he fixed it, he lived in it. I was getting payments. The only thing I'm unhappy about is after a few years, he decided to refinance it and take me out. But I find it was the financing. The purchase was easy, and the sale, that was the trick to the house. Was the value is the financing, and it was assumption. And the realtors didn't believe me. I guess my moral would be, have your realtor believe you. I don't know why they didn't, but because it was assumable and I would carry. And it was an easy transaction once we got there.
Did you come out ahead, Joe?
Of course, yes, I did.
That's what matters.
Other than I learned that, as they say, never go more than 60 miles from home if you're going to fix the house. Manage the property yourself. And I was like, oh man, what a water must be expensive. But yeah, you know, as far as the dollar goes, yes, it worked out on the dollars.
There is a question in chat. Did you assume the house from the bank?
No, I assumed it from an individual. I assumed it from an individual. It was brought to me, and
But it was a bank mortgage,
yes, it was a bank mortgage.
and the bank never found out that you did it, so they never foreclosed.
They never foreclosed and I resold it on an assumption.
Yeah, Steve, you might want to mention that most of these mortgages now have due on sale clauses. And
Almost every mortgage now has a due on sale clause.
right,
Um,
and
yeah,
that was,
so
go ahead, Steve.
go ahead. No, go ahead, Carl.
Yeah, and that's where the subject to comes in to, to bypass. I'll get to that in a second, but um, I have to ask Steve. In my experience, I have never seen a bank attempt to put you in default because you sold the property. As long as they're getting paid, they're happy. Have you ever seen a transaction or a situation where that happened and the bank did go after the?
I've had it happen 3 times, but 3 times over 40 years.
Right.
And it was all when, or actually 2 of the 3 were local banks. You have to be very careful. You can't do this if you have a mortgage with Genesee Regional Bank or Canandaigua National Bank, because they read the daily record every day and they see that a house that they hold a mortgage on was sold. So they're going to get almost immediate knowledge. Bank of America, not likely that they're going to find out. So you just have to be very careful.
Yep. And the second way that they find out pretty quickly is that insurance certificate, right? So
The
now the
insurance certificate,
now the insurance, the insurance information with a different owner, they want to see that certificate each year. Wait a minute, there's our borrower, and there's a new insurance. That's another way to catch you. I've never seen that happen. My experience, as long as you're getting paid, they look the other way.
and you always make sure that you keep the borrower on the insurance and you just have yourself as an additional insured. So as long as they don't pick up the fact that the property was deeded to someone, you can always say I'm the property manager. That's why I'm on the insurance as well. That's why the check is coming from someone other than the person that owes you the money. But if it's a local bank and they see that you filed a deed, they technically can foreclose.
Yeah, well, this was a national lender that was the financer on it. And that's the person I paid. But Carl brings up a point with the sub twos, and I know that's one of the topics here. Actually, I bought a property. It turned out to be another assumption. That was because of the way the attorney did it. My approach was I was going to take it as a sub two. And he wrote up the deed as an assumption, which I found out when I went to closing.
Now, the seller's attorney is going to try and do that every time, because if you default, he wants the seller to be able to sue you. Whereas on subject to, he can't sue you because you haven't specifically agreed in writing to assume it.
Well, this was my attorney. It was one of the firms downtown. And I don't know if it's still a bank, but it was a bank. And I was surprised when I saw the deed, and I said, "This is an assumption. Why is it not a subject to?" And he's going, "Oh well, we always do assumptions. We don't do subject tos here." He's going, "Well, I had it resold, so I really didn't care that much." But I was like, "This is doing it the wrong way. It should be a sub two."
So there's actually a question in the chat from Rob asking, what's the primary reason that you would do an assumption? Why is the seller interested, and why would the investor be interested? So long
I
question.
have answers, but somebody else want to give an answer?
Well, the investor is interested because they come up with way less money down because you're not paying off the mortgage. And the seller is interested if the house is distressed and it's not going to be easily sold, or they have some other reason. Joe LaBarbera bought a house that was a hoarder's house that I don't think there was an assumption, but there could have been, because there was no possibility that someone was going to list that property on the multiple listing service and sell it for cash because it was a mess.
Yep, and not bankable too. Yeah,
Not bankable,
yeah.
correct.
Yeah, it's
Correct.
back to the OPM. Whether it's a bank or seller financing, it's other people's money to finance your transaction. Always want to do that, but keep an eye on over leveraging. We'll talk about that later. That'll bite you in the butt.
It just makes life it can make life a heck of a lot easier, especially like Steve said, if you have no money, you're able to get into a property because you're in there solving somebody's problem. Their problem is that property. Your problem is probably money, and you bring the two of you together, and you can usually work out a deal where they're happy. Otherwise it's just sitting there. They can't sell it, so they're like, okay, now I'm open. T and C, time and circumstances have changed people's minds. First they wanted cash, now they're like, it's been sitting. Now I'm open to doing something as far as for being able to assume the mortgage. Okay, and another thing too is like for me, I've never gone too crazy trying to assume mortgages from the banks. Obviously you can do that with subject to is a whole different situation. One of the things that I like finding out is that sometimes I'll run across properties that already have a private lender. So maybe somebody like Joe McGuire may hold a mortgage on something. And if he holds the mortgage on it, it's a heck of a lot simpler to be able to go to the lender, somebody like Joe, who's a private guy, and say, hey, listen, my name is Joe Barbera. I'm actually looking to buy the property. So those, I've had really good luck with that. I'm sure other people have done that too. And actually, I'm going to let Joe talk about, because I'm sure Joe has had people call him up and say, hey, your guy wants to sell me his house. Can I assume the mortgage versus me giving him the full amount down? So if Joe holds if it's $100,000 house and the guy, and the guy wants to get, let's just say he owes Joe 50 grand, and the guy goes, give me $5,000, I'll walk away and you take over the mortgage, so you're buying a $100,000 house for $55,000, it's not a bad deal. But I'm going to let Joe speak on what his criteria is, because I'm sure Joe has gotten phone calls like that. Is that correct, Joe?
Yeah, yes, I've almost, they have almost always worked out where it could be assumed. It would have to be a case where I had real concerns with with the new buyer, but other than that, yeah, I'm happy for the loan to keep going. As I tell people, I'm not in the business of being paid. Well, I want to be paid off, but I don't want to be paid off right away. Yeah, no, it's easy. And particularly if you're back to the regular assumption, not the private assumption. Well, I guess even the private assumption, where it's a private first, less cash and very good odds that the seller will carry the second. Because he wants to sell whatever, and you're not going to go get a bank second on it. It just isn't going to happen. So there's real good odds that the seller will carry a second, which reduces your cash investment for the buyer.
Assuming the mortgage also saves you a significant amount of closing costs.
Yep, that was my other point for it, that it saves. You don't need mortgage tax. And if it was an assumption, to go back to the original assumption, you don't need the appraisal. And it just is, it's a lot simpler transaction because of the financing.
Let me tell you about an assumption deal. Steve, you and I go way back. There was a time with FHA and VA, freely assumable. Remember that?
Well, there was a bank, Dime Savings Bank. I don't know if you were here for Dime.
Yeah.
Every Dime Savings Bank deal was assumable until Dime went bankrupt.
Right. But all FHAs were freely assumable. So
Dime was actually a conventional. But yeah, all FHAs were assumable until probably sometime in the mid to late 80s.
Yep. So I had a CPA friend come to me with 3 properties. There was a FHA mortgage, and at that time, if you remember, very, very little down payment. So these mortgages were almost close to the value of the property. And they came to me and said, Carl, we got to get out. Just out. Just assume these mortgages. That's the price. Now looking at these deals, this is they're over. I can't do these things. They don't make sense like that. I have to pass. Call me up a couple other days. They're negotiating against themselves now, right? They go, here's what we'll do. We'll sweeten the pot for you. We'll cover all your closing costs, and we'll give you $2,000 per property. Now, back in the day when no money down, Leon, was the talk of the day, right? There's no such thing. It should have been no down payment down, right? You still got to have closing cost money. That was a true no money down deal that I experienced. But I didn't stop at $2,000. I says, guys, you got to do better than that. So they upped it to $5,000 per property.
That's pretty funny.
That's pretty win-win.
Yeah. Freely Sumba was one of my first. I did 3 of them, my first deals. Now they're gone. And but Carl, you bring up a good point, because for people who have acts, because obviously people want to get rid of some of these properties. Our private lender like Joe doesn't want to take back a property, and first of all, get on great terms with private lenders, because every once in a while they'll have somebody, they'll have a property they may have to take back. And I've actually gotten phone calls where the lender's like, look, this guy, I don't know if he's going to be able to make it. I don't want the property. Here's what it's worth. If I take it back, do you want to just assume the mortgage?
Yeah.
Because I know for a fact, Joe McGuire does not want to own a house. He just wants to own the note and get paid every single month.
Yep, everything I sell, financing is available. Any house I own, we can work out the financing. Don't worry about it.
Yeah, exactly. So that's why you got to get, once you get in with someone who has if you're taking one of those over, don't be afraid to ask that private lender. Say, hey, listen, do you hold mortgages for somebody else? And especially once you're established, and they're like, yeah, you know what? I got this guy. He may want to just get rid of it. He's in over his head. I don't know, whatever reason. Maybe he had to move or whatever. Put it out there to that private lender, because I'm sure Joe's picked up the phone. Joe, have you ever had to almost take back a property, but you ended up calling somebody else to take it over?
No.
Really? That's fantastic. Wow.
Well, because I try to work with a person to not have to do it, the borrower or the owner.
Yeah.
It's not my business to own the real estate. And so I try to work it out with them. If they will do anything cooperative, I will, we can work it. It's only, and it has happened where they become absolute jerks and just, to hell with it. I'm gonna foreclose you just because you've really annoyed me. But other than that, no, I don't want to.
So there's a question in the chat.
Money or the attorneys.
Right. No offense, Steve.
It's okay.
There's a question in chat right now asking, how do you find assumption deals in Rochester? And I know there's been a lot of talk about assumptions really aren't done as much anymore, and it's almost exclusively subject to. So let's transition topics off of assumptions and move right into the subject to section.
I want to back up 1 second though, Andy. Steve has, my understanding, and I know we talked about it a little bit, might not work all the time, but has a version for an assumption. And I'm probably using the wrong term when I say a version for it, but something that would approach an assumption if both parties are willing to do it and their attorney.
You're talking about a lands contract?
Right.
In a lands contract, you're basically doing an assumption of the mortgage, but it's a hybrid between an actual real estate closing and a lease of the property, where the buyer makes the mortgage payments every month, but the buyer doesn't get title to the property, doesn't get a deed to the property until the mortgage has been paid off. So it can go on for years where the property stays in the seller's name.
Huh. So how would
Okay.
you, I guess to answer the question, how would you find an assumption in Rochester today? Is it something where there's a list like there is for probate, or is
No,
it something?
It's a deal that you work out.
Yeah,
Exactly.
there's no list or anything of that kind. It's just talking to people and finding out that they have a mortgage that that you need to either take subject to or work into a contract.
I mean, back in the day when you had FHA mortgages and VA mortgages that were freely assumable, you could come up with a list that's similar to what you were talking about, Andy. But nowadays, it's something that you have to look at and then basically recognize that from a creative standpoint, it's something that you can do. And so that's really where Joe and Joe are with their comments. You know, they basically understand the situation and say, okay, I can do this to eliminate these costs and maybe make the numbers work better. So
Yeah, what you're doing is you want to find the seller's need and
Yep.
solve their need in a way
Now,
that works for you.
now the other issue too is that whenever you start going these creative financing situations, the sellers get freaked out. So
Do
you
not
have to
say
be able
creative.
to explain it to them, you know, in a way where they're going to understand, because statistically confused people do nothing. So if you're confusing them, and if they don't have the confidence in you, first of all, they're going to buy you first, and then whatever you're talking about second. So if they have no confidence in you whatsoever, especially in your ability to explain it to them in a nice, clear, concise way, you're done. So T&C, time and circumstances, will always change people's situation as far as what they're willing to accept and what they're willing to do.
yeah, so let's,
My suggestion is you absolutely forget the word creative finance in a creative structure. They do not want, owners don't want to hear creative. And their attorneys for sure don't want to hear creative.
Nope.
yeah, absolutely agree. I mean, clearly we're using that because obviously it's the older crowd, for sake of better words, who understand some of this mortgage stuff. And let's go on to subject two, because we want to make sure we get to some of the latter items, because they are a little bit more readily possible today than some of the first items here. I mean, clearly, as I was indicating, with the way the war used to be with freely assumable items, it was just something that people just automatically almost look to do. One of the things that I didn't mention, and I think we talked about it a little bit, is if you look at what we're doing, one of the most important components, and that's one of the reasons why it's great to have Steve here, Steve Feederson here, is because of the fact that you can come up with creative ways of doing things. And if you look back at that definition around limitations and what are there, one of the things that I like to always suggest to people is that it's great to be creative, but you want to be legal first. So even when you're doing assumption and subject to, there are contractual limitation, but nothing that it could really be in a normal situation illegal, for sake of better words. So that said, let's go to subject two, and let's let Carl Weeks kick it off this time. Carl, are you still there?
Yeah, yep, I'm here. Hold on, let me get back over there. Am I on? Yeah.
Yeah, you're
So
on.
we kind of covered that a little bit with the mortgage assumption, but like Steve and we've been saying, those are pretty rare now, because all the subject twos that I've attempted to do, it gets to the attorney, it's dead on arrival, right, Steve? So either
Yes,
you turn it into
almost every time.
every time, except one time. I got to tell you this one time. But let me, before I do that, the guy that asked that question is a good question. Why would a seller agree to a subject to? Well, my situation was she had a personal reason. She had to get off that deed, other than a quick claim, like yesterday. And she was behind with the mortgage. She just wanted to get the mortgage caught up. and get off that deed. We actually closed it at 4 weeks. It was a rush. It was a subject two. The only way I could do it, one of the tools in the toolbox is a subject two to speed that thing right up. And what was funny about this is it took it to the lawyer, and you get the lawyer's speech, and she goes, "I'm paying you to close this deal. Close it the way I want you to close it." That's exactly what she said to the attorney.
You don't get enough of those, unfortunately.
Right. Yeah, that's extremely rare, but that's
Yeah.
one experience.
But there's all kinds of reasons like that, whether it's medical issues, getting divorced, moving to the other side of the country and not wanting to still have the house. It's just those sorts of circumstances.
Right. Other than, you think, why not sell it, right? That's the other option. Well, again, speed was important for this lady. Couldn't wait to put it on the market and go through an assumption process. Speed. I solved her problem. Speed.
Assuming a mortgage, if you're going to get the bank's approval, is not really any faster than getting a new mortgage.
Correct. Anybody else on subject twos? That's a short topic.
Other than they're great. As a buyer, they're great.
Yeah, I mean, I did one years ago. Steve did it for me, and the guy, he traveled. He had a wife. He just wanted to get rid of a couple of his properties, and what was great was they were both making money. I ended up giving him $1,000 for each one, and it made 700 and I think it was either 775 a month or something like that profit. He just wanted nothing to do with them. It was a 2-family and a 3-family, and he was done with them. And then I had him for a year, and then the deal was that I ended up just selling him off to another guy who ended up closing on him. And but I mean, my return was fantastic on it. I learned a lot, but it was a great way to get into properties dirt cheap.
Okay, any other questions on subject twos? Okay, so let's go to seller financing. I mean, clearly, this is a subject that is a little bit more, let's use the word useful for today's time, because seller financing, I mean, if you could do it and you could do it properly and appropriate, hopefully we'll get through those steps that'll have you understand what those things are. It'll be an item you can add to your toolbox, so to speak. So let's go with and I'm sort of going through the list here, so Mr. Joe Labavera knows that he's next, so to speak. Unless someone else had wanted to talk about that. Carl, do you want to talk about it?
Yeah, I have a really cool story with this one, if you don't mind. Before I do, Leon, let me just touch upon a couple of principles on structuring a deal, a creative deal, so you can get to the closing table, with a deal, and it's a positive outcome, right? Always make sure you're engaged with a motivated seller. Very important. Okay, a lot of tire kickers out there. I've learned to don't even talk about the deal, the property, the problems. Learn to develop rapport and connection. Get to learn about these people. What makes them tick? Talk a little bit. Get to know each other. It's going to pay off at the end. They're going to remember this, and it goes further because that positive end result, you now become a referral, right? So, very important. Talk about their life, their work, house and neighborhood, what's going on these days. Eventually, you're going to be talking about the property. Then you find out what the problem is. Remember, we're problem solvers. Find out what that motivation is and solve the problem. Most importantly, develop a win-win outcome. Both parties have to win. And it usually does when you solve their problem. You get to structure the terms if you're solving their problems. It's a win-win transaction. You'll feel good about it, and it's a great experience. A win-lose outcome. You're going to start getting a reputation. Landlords, everybody talks out there. You'll be out of business soon. So work on that win-win situation. This leads me into my single-family house on Reynolds Street. It came from one of my seeds, right? Seeds, what are those? Those are the postcards that you post on the distressed property, the letters you mail out, the phone calls you make. Those are seeds that blossom someday. You'll be getting calls. I got that call. Little old lady, we're going to call her Betty. Hey, I got your letter. Yeah, I'm not ready to sell, but I got to sell. I'm getting old. Oh, I'll be right over to talk about it, which leads me to another principle. Always try to meet the owner of the property the best that you can. I hate trying to negotiate, and today it's kind of tough not to, over the phone or text or that kind of stuff. If they're out of town, I understand that, but you get a lot more done in person. But anyways, she was, I go over there, we had our little report thing going on. And so what's the issue? What are you trying to do? Well, I'm not ready to, I don't want to list the property, because that was my first question. Why not list it? I don't want to list it. Why not? Because I don't want to quickly move. I want to move on my own terms. It's an older lady. She had to transition into an apartment, and I want to move on my own terms. I don't want to be the pressure of because of a buyer. All right. Well, how much time you need? A year. You've got your year. What else is the issue? I have no family here, and I don't have maintenance ability while I'm living here during this time. I don't have nobody well, I'm your guy. I'll take care of your lawn, maintenance, whatever you need while you're there. Boom, we struck the deal. And by doing that, I dictated the terms and the price. I think it was like 15 grand. And ready for this? Seller financing. She held it first, the whole thing, 100%. Okay. Remember, she had to live there a year or more. So take your time. We really didn't put an end to it, but she was on a mission to look for an apartment. And we closed on the deal. She agreed to, she had no problem with just paying on the principal. Bam, 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 bam. Well, back in the day, IRS saw that differently, right, Stephen? In seller financing, we're going to charge you 9%. We're going to consider 9% of that as income, whether you charge it or not. So
they still do.
They do. Is it? I was going to ask what today.
Imputed interest.
Yeah. Is that still 9 or is it different?
No, it's still 9.
Oh, wow. That was the year. So, all right, 9%, blah, blah, blah. So, long
Like
story,
6.
Is it 6?
Yeah, it's more like 6 and an
Did they
8.
change it to 6?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Oh, they've dropped along with the drop in interest rates, but only
Great.
down so far. Yeah, it's not 9 anymore.
Great.
So
Okay.
long story short, a year goes by. Carl, I'm ready to move. Great. And by the way, in this mortgage, here's what went down. And one of her problems or her request was, when I move, I need money to move with. How much you need? 1,000. You got your 1,000. So the 1,000 went right off the mortgage, the loan. 15 to 14. Boom. She has the money. She moves out. Another part of the mortgage. I don't have to start making that first payment until 90 days after she moves. Why did I do that?
Time to fix it up.
There you go. Get a tenant in there so the tenant pays that mortgage payment. So, and again, that's just an example of just utilizing the right tools out of the toolbox, solving the problem. It was a win-win transaction. She sends me Christmas cards every year, that kind of thing. And we had a relationship for 5 years after that. It was great. So that's an example.
Yeah. Another thing too, because the reason why they want to hold the mortgage is because of capital gains. And I got a friend of mine right now who's doing a deal in the 19th ward. It's going to close in a couple of weeks. I know Steve's doing it for him. And
Okay.
Carl, he did that because of what you said. He's talked to the guy, he literally sat with the guy for a couple of hours, talked to him. They got to know each other, had a trust factor, and it's a 2-family in the 19th ward. Okay. And it's worth 150 to 160 all day long, all day long. And he had a ton of people who wanted it, but he cared a lot about the tenants. And he found out that the tenants, he wanted to make sure the tenants were taken care of. Okay. So after, just like you said, he was talking to him, found out what he really wanted. Okay. And he goes, you know what? I'll hold paper. And it's worth 150 to 160. He's buying it for 110. It needs nothing. And I do mean nothing. It's rented. It's making $1,200 a month. Rents could easily go up to $1,600, but he's going to, you know, these tenants have been there for years. They keep the place great. He's giving them $1,000 down. It's going to cost him more to close on it. So the seller is going to take money out of his pocket to close on it. Okay. $1,000 down. He's going to make $400 a month profit. And the interest rate, 3%.
All right.
3%.
Yeah.
I was like, oh my God. Now he could take, and he's getting $40,000 to $50,000 in equity immediately. Immediately. Okay. So, you know, and he's going to start making profit of $400 a month. And that guy, you know, because of capital gains, you know, was, you know, they're both helping each other, but he more or less, you know, took that gentleman because he got to sit down. Exactly what you said, Carl, to a T is exactly what he did. He went and met with him and sat down and found out what he needed, what he wanted. And he said, yeah, you know what? If you're willing to hold paper, willing to hold a mortgage, here's what's going on. He's going to hold it. I don't know if it's 3 years, 5 years. I can't remember, but that's a fantastic deal. And because the guy, you know, he's owned it for 36 plus years. So he wanted to avoid capital gains. So he's happy. The other gentleman's happy. Everybody, it's like a party over there. He got a sweet deal. I was so jealous when I heard that deal. I was like, oh my God, you know, so power of asking people to hold paper.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things where creative deal making. I mean, you gotta, most important part of what you just said is, and I think maybe Carl addressed it a little bit, and that is the main job you have is to address the needs of the seller. You know, you gotta
That's exactly what he did.
have it be a win-win situation. In the end, that's what it must be to be successful, is my view. Anybody else that wanted to have some input associated with seller financing?
There is a question actually from Greg Brooks in the chat about the land contract that was mentioned. If the owner does not get paid, what recourse do they have during a land contract?
The landlord, if he doesn't get what?
If he doesn't get paid. So if he signs over a land contract as opposed to an assumption.
That is the downside to a land contract, is that particularly in the city, they will not evict someone off of a land contract. You actually have to do an ejectment action, which is much more similar to a foreclosure than it is to an eviction. Scott Spear had one of those that went bad, and we actually came within inches of having to do an ejectment action. But we did end up getting the person out.
Wow.
That is the
All right.
downside. That's part of the downside. And the other is, God forbid the seller gets into a car accident and doesn't have insurance, and so, you know, somebody gets very badly injured, takes a $300,000 judgment against the seller. That judgment is against the house.
Or doesn't pay his credit cards off.
Or doesn't pay his credit cards off. That, you know, that's the bad side from the buyer's standpoint. The bad side from the seller standpoint is, once again, if the buyer doesn't make the mortgage payments, the seller's credit is ruined. One way to at least make an attempt at protecting the seller in those circumstances is you actually have the buyer make the mortgage payments to the seller, and the seller make the mortgage payments to the bank, so the seller knows the mortgage payment is being made. But there is the downside to that is when the seller steals the money and doesn't pay the mortgage. So there's no clear answer.
How often do you see a land contract, Stephen, come across your desk?
I've probably only done one or two in the last 3 or 4 years. For a while, they were popular. It was the
Well,
flavor
Steve-
of the day for a while.
Steve, what it matter as to where the business is? In other words, they're probably not very prevalent in the city of Rochester, but I've been involved in a few in the surrounding counties where actually the attorneys recommend the land contract. They liked it as a solution.
Well, you've got someone with good credit and it's a single family house and they're going to live there with the family. The odds are good. You know, it's all about playing the odds.
Follow-up question from Greg. What's the advantage of a land contract versus a sale where the sale holds the mortgage?
Who holds the
The
title?
The
seller
seller
holds the
holds the
mortgage?
mortgage. The seller holds the mortgage, sorry.
The advantage to the seller is that they have, even though they may still have a problem getting the buyer out and have to do an ejection action, they still have title so that if the buyer defaults, they still own the house. They don't have to foreclose. It's just better control.
Okay.
It's about
Thank you.
who has the title. It's really what it comes down to.
The
The
seller.
Yep.
seller would have the title in a land contract.
Right.
Yep. Any
I
other
mean,
example?
I'm working on a
please.
closing literally right now. My client owns a commercial property and he took it back in foreclosure. It was a horrendously nasty foreclosure. The guy went bankrupt. He basically did everything he could. My client, who has a tendency to tell tall stories, says that he spent $75,000 on legal fees to get the property back. I think that's a little out of whack, or I wish that I had the 75,000, either one. But he's selling the property now. It's a commercial property. It's got a number of different auto repair places, a Sprint store, and a T-Mobile store. And my client wants to sell the property for $950,000 and hold a mortgage for $950,000, not get a dime down. I think he's out of his mind. The additional collateral that he's going to get is a property in New Jersey that's free and clear and supposedly worth $100,000 that we're going to put a mortgage on that property as well instead of getting a down payment. I just think it is just a terrible, terrible idea, and that he could easily end up going through that whole foreclosure mess again. But he wants to dump it so badly that there's a very good chance he's going to do it. He's going to sell it to one of the tenants, and it's a tenant that has been paying the rent very, very much on time, and just a really nice, good tenant. But I'm scared to death that we're holding a mortgage for 100%.
Did everybody hear what Steven said? It's not listed here, but it was a creative deal on a creative deal, because I've done these before, where seller financing doesn't have to be the property they're buying. It could be a free and clear property elsewhere. It could be their own personal home. It could be a spread against 2 or 3 different properties, just to cover that risk, right? So you have that option when coming to owner financing.
Yeah, I had a transaction today where my client is building a bakery, which is going to be attached to Home Depot in Henrietta, and got an SBA mortgage, and she's not going to own the land. You know, obviously she's leasing from Benderson, who's a large developer, and they're building the building. She's got it's about a $500,000 deal. And as part of the deal, the bank took a third mortgage on her house for $166,000, just as additional collateral for the Henrietta deal.
Wow.
That's very much creative financing.
And it doesn't surprise me at all that Benderson would do that or have a hand in that, by the way.
No, yeah, I agree. I was not involved in negotiating the lease. She hired a specialist that worked with Benderson in Buffalo, but she tells me it was a uniquely interesting experience.
Leon, you want to move on a little bit?
Yes, sir. I just want to make sure I don't cut anyone off. So I mean, basically, we talked a lot about first there, but it was first or seconds. I mean, like seconds, I know speaking for myself, I always feel a little bit uncomfortable with those versus first. If anybody want to talk about, I want to take back seconds and that sort of arena.
Well, let me talk about another thing we haven't spoken about yet: spread mortgages. Um, where we
Define,
have
define spread
Yep.
mortgages.
So what that is where, in fact, we're about to try to put one together with a tenant and the owner. So this is the owner. The owner has a mortgage on a property. She wants to sell it to the tenant. She's willing to hold the financing. So there's going to be a large mortgage over her first one. Spread, wrap. Steve maybe can help out here with the terminology here a little bit. But so what's happening is she's going to be making a payment to the owner. The owner makes the payment to the bank, and the difference she keeps for profit and principal reduction. So we're working on this one. It's a little bit, again, creative, but it does require some legal maneuvering here too.
Now, when you say a wraparound mortgage, I actually have not seen a wraparound mortgage in years. But a wraparound mortgage, to give an example, is you buy a property for $120,000 that has an existing mortgage of $100,000 on it,
Yep.
and you do the equivalent of taking it subject to or an assignment. But by wrapping around the mortgage, if the mortgage interest rate is 5%, you can charge 9% on the $100,000 as the seller, and you keep the 4%, and then you send the 5% to the bank.
Bingo. Yep.
Yep, I mean, it was something that was fairly commonly done back in the day. I haven't ever heard it called spread, but I understand what Carl is talking about. That's the reason why I asked for the definition there. So let's move on to another item, master lease option. And Carl, I think you've done a little bit more of those things than we have. And want to start off with a little bit of a definition around master lease option, particularly in your, well, in my mind, I was saying, well, what's the difference between master lease option and lease option? So I'll let you take it over from there.
Well, I appreciate it, Leon. I'm in a couple right now. It's actually not a property; it's a portfolio. I'll explain that in a minute. But master lease agreement provides an opportunity to the seller's still going to hold, be the owner, but it's a way for you to control property when you don't have money, you don't have the ability for banking, right? So, but you control property for profit. So what are it? So my deals right now, I got two. And the situations were great. They had a portfolio. They were on a crash and burn, and so they came to me to rescue them. And long story short, my agreement to them is that I'm going to pay them their total PITI, right? And I have a master lease over the whole thing. So anything above that is all mine. Now, of course, out of that, it's all the expenses, maintenance, upkeep, management, and so forth. Remember, I'm paying her PITI. Right, so she's still doing taxes, insurance. I have one that's 7 years in. I have one that's 10 years in. It's working out very well.
So basically, you sign a lease with the owner of the property, and then you sublease the property.
Correct. That's what I mean. Right.
The management with a sandwich lease.
The what?
It's a management agreement with a subject sandwich lease.
This one, no, I happen to be the manager, but
Right. Yeah.
There is a management agreement alongside that. Yeah. Now with this type of controlling the property, a lot of the master leases could be structured in a way that you've also worked out a sale on the other end.
Yeah.
option to buy, so that you can at least lock in the current value. So if the property appreciates, it's yours, not the seller. So you can negotiate a sale, an option to buy at the very end, up front with the master lease.
Right.
People do that with apartment complexes too. Lease, because they'll go in, they'll do a master lease, they'll take it over. And then, let's call it whether it be 6 months to a year. So that way they raise the rents up, get the value up higher. And then if they have to go to the bank, they're able to pull the money out and be able to pay off the actual owner, pay him off. So that's, I know people use those. I know people have done those for them. I've never done a master lease, but I'm looking.
Yeah, I think that, I I agree with what Joe is saying. I mean, typically when I've seen those things, it's been with multiple unit things like apartments, apartment complexes, that sort of thing.
And again, it depends upon that motivation of the seller. Typically, sellers are motivated. They want to get out quickly. They can't wait for long-term financing to come into play. They got to get out for some reason. So that's a tool to use, put together, so you can get in right away, control the property while you're working on financing or working on the property to bring up the value. It's a good tool to use for that.
Yeah, I mean, and Carl mentioned this earlier, but just to reiterate, I mean, one of the most important things to do is to have sellers where there is a situation where they really need help, and the standard approach to things is just not going to necessarily work. In a lot of cases, you can have situations where the standard approach to things will work. You use some of the techniques that's being talked about here, but you go through the numbers and you're able to sweeten the pot. So sweeten the pot, I mean, maybe you increase the interest rate if you're doing owner financing, or if that's involved, but you make the deal better. And how do you find better? Better is better from the perspective of the seller. What is it that they need? That's what you really need to address, because what's important to you may not be important at all to them. And that's one of the key pieces to being able to be creative, because you have some techniques and strategies, but you really don't know where you're going to start until you actually have that discussion with the seller.
And Leon, often there's multiple problems to solve too. That's interesting.
Absolutely. I mean, and the other thing is, and we haven't talked about this part, but sometimes you can, but you combine some of these things together. That it becomes a little bit convoluted when you do that, but that is a way of trying to address things as well. We talked about it a little bit as we went through it, but I mean, the key piece is, what does that person really need, and what is it going to be that you're going to do to address their particular needs? Because if somebody just says, I don't care, I want cash, and I got to have it this way, then, as soon as someone says it's got to be this way, then, the walls are coming in a bit, and your ability to do things is being limited. But still, these guys, they deal with this all the time, and they come up with creative ways of doing things.
Yeah. Why does it have to be done this way? Because there's multiple ways for that to get done that way.
Exactly. So now, what other questions does the audience have before we move into short sales, which is one of the last items that we have here.
I hate them.
You don't have to. Great though.
Yeah, you don't have to. You don't have to be quite as creative, but remember back in the 90s, short sales early 90s short sales didn't really exist that much. And then all of a sudden they came into being, and whoever that person was that came up with that, they were pretty creative. So, Joe,
yeah, why don't you explain what a short sale is?
The simple definition is the bank takes back less money than what they owe. I mean, that's about as simple as it gets.
Yep.
And so, I mean, if it was 1975, 1985, and someone told you that the bank was going to do that, you would say, this person right here, oh boy, I don't know what it is, but there's something going on and it's not logical. I had
Yeah,
to clean that one up.
That came out of the 2008, 2009 bank debacle.
Yes.
It was just a
Exactly.
short payoff that they renamed. That's all.
So you can tell that you're talking to this guy that's a mortgage guy when he comes up with some different definitions for short sales.
That's where it
Mr.
started.
Yeah,
It
Mr.
it
McGuire.
started as a short payoff.
Yes.
They're a great
So-
way to make money on the
So
property.
Joe, why don't you tell us about some of your, because I know you do a fair number of short sales. Is this, what's the deal that you did when you did the 6-figure? Was that the short sales?
No, that was that was well,
Why don't we do the short sales and then you can tell us about that one?
yeah. That was the what do you call it there? We just did one a couple weeks ago. Steve Fearson closed it for us. The gentleman bought the house, and within 3 months got into a car accident, motorcycle accident. He had to learn how to walk, everything. He hadn't made a payment in over 2 years. The house was worth around 135, probably between 135 and 150. It's in Greece, and he owed, oh my God, he owed, I can't remember. I think it was somewhere around I don't know if it was 130, 140, 150. It was somewhere, but it needed a lot of work, and he needed to get out. So we went to him, and we also went to the bank, and we put in a purchase offer, and we talked to the bank about doing a short sale. So even though he owed well over $100,000+, wasn't making a mortgage payment, it was advantageous for him to be able to just get out from underneath it. So after going through all the paperwork and everything else, the bank settled for somewhere right around $48,000 or $50,000. That's what the purchase price was going to be for the property. And so again, he owed over $100,000. The bank sent someone over to look at it because it needed so much work. And then what happened was that, the bank settled for just about 50, but then he also had liens. So we ended up buying the house for, I think we're somewhere around $65,000 is what we bought the house for. Now, for the seller, he was happy because he was able to move on with his life. It doesn't show as a foreclosure. It shows as a short sale. It still dinged his credit, but nowhere near as bad as a straightforward foreclosure. So it didn't stay on his record for the next 7 years. The guy was only probably in his late 30s, early 40s, has kids. He needed to start a new life. And at the same time, because of the short sale and actually because of his accident, he had a bunch of liens. We ended up paying off, I think around 10, 12, probably close, I don't know, 10, 12, 13, $14,000 worth of liens. It was actually more than that.
Well, the liens were probably $30,000 or $40,000.
Yeah, we ended up settling
negotiated down to 10 or 12.
Yeah, we drove Steve crazy, and and the thing is that so what happened was that we ended up buying it. We're into it for like 65. We're going to put probably, I don't know, 35,000 into the property. And then we're going to end up reselling it. We'll probably list it for around 135 to 145. So it was a great way to be able to go in there where some people are like, well, listen, I can't buy this house because you owe over $100,000+. It's only worth 100. It's worth right about what you owe. But he was so far behind on payments, you're able to go in there and actually be able to buy it at a decent price as long as the bank agrees to it. It's a fantastic tool to be able to use. It's kind of like you watching your neighbor's dog watch grass grow sometimes. So, other ones have taken a lot longer. Some of them have taken a shorter amount of time. As long as you have patience, you're able to, you can come out as long as you make the numbers work. If the bank came back and said, hey, you know what? we want $120,000. We were not obligated to buy it. We could have just walked away from the deal. So through working with the bank, we settled on about 50,000 by the time we were done. I think we're somewhere right around 64,
65. Yeah.
Yeah. So he
Now,
was happy. We were happy.
So now the one thing you have to keep in mind, and Joe and I talk about this regularly, is Joe likes to wholesale a deal or have a double closing, because then he doesn't have to use his own money. But with a short sale, you can't do that. The entire definition of a short sale is that you have talked the bank into the fact, you have convinced the bank that the purchase price you're paying for the property is the value of the property. So if Joe gets a purchase offer from me and tries to close a double closing where he's buying it for 60 and he's selling it for 100, it is a direct violation of affidavits that he is signing at the short sale with the bank saying that this is the value of the property. So you have to have your own money and you have to be ready to close it in your name, even if you're going to want to flip it in the future. And some banks say you can't flip it for a particular period of time. It might be 6 months. And other banks may put you can flip it during the first 90 days, but you can only make 18%. And then after 6 months, then you can sell it and make any profit you want. So you just have to wait until you get the short sale approval to have the answer to those questions.
Let's talk about some of the mechanics here of a short sale, so these people know. These take a long time. Why? Because the banks are in control, and we know how banks work, right? Who named it short sale? It should be long sale. Secondly, it's a partnership with the seller, because the seller needs to participate and provide documentation, a stack of stuff like this. Why would I want to? The only reason I see is I want to preserve my credit. I value my credit. That's the only reason I see them.
Only reason.
Yeah. Why not? Why not just walk away? And second, and moreover, quite often, because they're in that situation, as Steve knows, the title's clogged all up with other junk. So there's negotiations going on, there's haggling going on. I don't want to do that. So these are very, very long time. So you got to go into this not expecting to close. I did 8 of them, none closed. Anywhere from 8 months to 2 years.
And that's why I tell people if they're going to get a mortgage to buy the property, it's not their property. You're wasting your time. If they're going to live there, they just got married, this is their first house, they're all excited. Wrong deal.
Right.
Yeah, because you're buying a problem, and like we're looking at one right now in Webster, and you have to have your own cash. And now there's a foot of water in the basement, but it's Webster, and if you go to a bank, they're going to want you to turn the electric on, turn the heat on, and turn the water on. You don't even own the house. Why would you do that?
Yeah.
Come back and say they want too much for it.
And on that note, Joe, same thing, this whole long time thing. Well, things are going to happen with this property, right? Things happen. Who knows? That value over 8 months just went in a different direction.
Yeah, but you can walk away, and you don't just focus on one. It's just another tool that you can use. Okay. I know some people, they play the numbers, and they figure, hey, you know what? I'll just get a bunch of them going. They're out there right now. There's a moratorium going on, but there's going to be a lot more short sales coming up. So get ready, because if you don't know about them, you better start knowing about them, because these are going to be fantastic tools for you to know. Because you're going to be helping out a lot of people, getting them out of situation. And then also the bank goes, why should I do a short sale? Because the bank, in some cases, the bank will actually give them cash to be able to walk away from the house. They give them money so that way they don't destroy the property, anywhere between $2,000 and $10,000. I tell the people, don't focus on the 10. You may get 2,000, you may only get $500, you may get nothing. I don't know, but please don't focus on the 10. We're going to try for the 10,000. Don't focus on it. So I let them know right up front about that.
Yeah, I mean,
Go ahead, Steve.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
Go
Go
ahead.
ahead, Leon. There's a question in the chat box.
Yeah, no, I was just gonna say, I mean, one of the key things about short sale, and I just want to reiterate, you know, I've done short sales before, and particularly back in the very beginning, I was focused on particular properties in particular areas and a very, very focused approach. And you'll become very, very frustrated unless you take the strategy that Joe Lababero just talked about, and that is that you have a lot of these short sales in the stream, and you just say, well, if one of them take place, then fine, and because the vast majority of them probably are not. But I'm gonna guess, and I'm only guessing, probably this year already, because I haven't talked to Joe Lababero about this, but I'm gonna say he's done probably half a dozen short sales.
Not that, but I think we're about to do three or four. We're trying to get a couple more going right now.
Yeah, and it's going to be something that's going to be a lot more prevalent as soon as we get past the challenges that we have right now with all the moratoriums and those sorts of things. It's going to be just a lot of foreclosures that are possibly going to be taking place, and a lot of people are going to be looking to do short sales where right now it's not really on their radar. Just my own editorial, so to speak.
The issue with them, from my perspective, is that there is no science to it. There's no way to sit down and say, if we make this offer, the bank is going to accept it based on what they're owed. A number of years ago, a client of mine bought a beautiful condominium in Florida. And my wife and I stayed there for a week, and he bought it at the height of the market. I would say that the day after he bought it, the price fell by 50%. So it ended up a short sale. I put in a purchase offer for $225,000, and about 8 months later, I raised it to $275,000. And about 3 years later, the bank finally accepted a contract from someone. They carried it for 4 years. If you work out the amount of money that they lost over those 4 years, my first deal probably made them more money, would have made them more money conceptually than they made 4 years later, even if they sold it for $100,000 more. So there's just no common sense to them. And that's why they're just not my preferred file to work at.
There's a question asking, do you just go to the bank and ask them if you can purchase the house from the person for a specific price, or how does that process work?
You have to put in a purchase offer, and you have to go to the there's a specific department for it, and you don't just call them up, and you have to. There's a certain way to do it, which and you have to go to a real estate attorney that knows what the heck they're doing in regards to short sales, and it's loan. So when you're doing that. You don't just call them up and say, hey, listen, I want to buy this. The customer service department is the one you call. There's actually a different department for that. You work with them. And if it's being foreclosed on all at the same time, the left hand doesn't know what the right hand is doing at the banks. You got to make sure that all of a sudden doesn't get sold at the auction. You got to let them know, the foreclosure department, hey, we actually have a purchase offer in hand. We're going to try buying it. So
Yeah, the loss mitigation department.
Yep, loss mitigation department. You're right.
There's one law firm that specializes in short sales. There's one realtor in town that specializes in short sales. The attorney that specializes in short sales, the contract says he gets a legal fee of $3,000 for handling the short sale. And if the bank says we're not going to pay it, then the buyer has to pay the $3,000 fee.
Yeah.
Right. I think the question is kind of asking, how can I find those? Isn't there a listing service in town that gives you a list of list pendants? Joe?
Foreclosures.
Yeah, I mean, certainly that's, Susan still does the, some of the lease pendants.
Okay.
I mean, certainly from, one of the things that we haven't talked about, and maybe it'll become a subject that we'll go over again, is the key component of doing real estate. I mean, we talked about the funding piece. We're talking about this piece now associated with creative financing. But one of the key pieces is how do you find deals? And so, I mean, you can actually start a process where what you're doing is you're going and looking at pre-foreclosures and those sorts of things where the solution that you would put in place, or one of the solutions you would put in place, would be to do a short sale. So, but that's coming off that lease Pensum's list that you were alluding to, Carl.
A question for Joe and Steve on this real quick. When is the best time to put the squeeze on the bank to maximize outcome? At the point of list pendants, or when they spend a whole bunch of money down the road?
I think it's at the point of list pendants. What do you think, Joe?
I think, go ahead, Joe.
Talking about Joe McGuire.
I thought it was you, Joe.
Yeah.
I've got a comment later, but go ahead.
You're the banker guy.
Yes, you, Joe LaBavera.
Oh, for me, I don't know. I just, well, I know what I've heard is that toward the end of the year, they want to get stuff off their books. So they're more, they're more apt to work with you, by the end of the year than they are at the beginning of the year.
Bingo. That would have been my answer too.
Good
Yeah.
point.
Well, the end of quarters, and
I was going to say that. Definitely end of quarters. And once they approve the mortgage, if it's near the end or the short sale, if it's near the end of the quarter, they may have taken like 9 months to approve, and then they'll give you 3 days to get it closed.
Yeah.
Okay.
I don't want to bash short sales, but I'll just tell a story of, to go along with what you're saying, where you want a number of them and not one, because it's not the property or the investment for an owner occupied. It may close, it may not, who knows? It's an investor deal. But I bought, it was a short sale, but that's not how I bought it. Realtor called, she had a client on a short sale on a house. They put in an offer, I forget the numbers, what they $150,000, someplace around 150. And the bank wouldn't take it. Was thinking about it, and finally let her know the day before the foreclosure sale that they rejected it. And I bought it at the auction for $70,000. And I turned around and sold it to her.
That's amazing.
I've had clients do that before.
Yeah. So I mean, the bank they turned down, 140, say, and they sold it for 70. My thought was it was an insurance claim.
I had very similar situation. I think Joe LaBarbera might have bought it at the foreclosure sale. He brings me the contract, and I have all the title papers because I had prepared for the short sale. The short sale would have given the bank $75,000 more than the bid. It's exactly what you said. That's why I don't like them. There's no common sense to whether they'll approve them or not.
Right. Right. But as an investor, and as we're saying, it's a numbers thing. It's an investment play, and it works. Sometimes if they work, they work great. If they don't, it's not for an owner occupied who's going to go live there.
Adam made a comment in the chat that he has one that's the owner owes $300K. Adam's getting it for 111, and the ARV is only 240. So you want to talk about a screwed up short sale situation? That's about it right there.
Wait, so he owes 300, and the bank's letting him buy it for 111.
Yep.
That doesn't seem too bad. I mean, I don't know how much work it's going to need. That's a nice short sale.
It's actually in really good shape. It was an owner, so they took care of it. Okay. We're going to
I mean, how much work are you going to put into it, Adam?
35.
Oh, there you go. There's a nice spread. That's a great short sale.
Yeah, I don't know, maybe, maybe Joe McGuire will be able to address a portion of it, but remember the banks, the numbers work a little bit different for them because they have support from the federal government. The numbers that they have to work with are different at different points in time, and that gets back to the comment around they have to do things at the end of the quarter because they need to be able to have money to make money. So, you know, they do a lot of balancing, and clearly for us, it makes very little sense. But the last time I checked, they do a pretty good job of making money.
Yeah, keep in mind, it also goes against that defaulted note goes against their loss reserves, and they have to reserve that on multiples of it. So, you know, if they can clean it off their book, they free up a lot of cash that they have to reserve for it.
Some of the decisions to not allow a short sale are based on the fact, like Leon said, that there might be mortgage insurance from the federal government, or there might be private mortgage insurance, PMI, which the buyers paid for over the course of the mortgage, and the insurance company may reimburse the bank if they lose money. So that you need to take those into consideration as well.
Yeah, and I mean, the unfortunate part is that, you know, clearly we have no idea about what's in play from the federal government and the numbers that they're looking at. So it makes it, Steve, as you indicated, something that's hard for us to figure out. It seems like it's a very unscientific and completely crazy approach to take. But that said, what I wanted to do was, if it's okay at this point, actually opening up the floor for more questions or areas in which people have questions, and maybe they did a project. Adam just went through one of them where he did some things with a short sale and was successful at it. If someone has an idea or questions, when I say idea, an idea that they feel is, you know, something that they want to get more detail about, let's just go into a question answer type of situation here and try to work our way through any concerns or questions people might have.
Feel free to unmute yourselves and speak up at this point. If you type it out, I will read it off.
Or if, Leon, if you don't mind, if somebody has actually structured and closed on a deal referencing the ones we talked about tonight and would like to share that experience, throw that in there too.
Absolutely open. I mean, as we said in the very beginning, the main approach that we take is what is it that we can do to help folks be successful. And so whichever way they want to roll, I think it's great.
Well, I know there was a question earlier from Robson and Eddie specific to where to find information on the 5 different types of deals that were discussed tonight. Any books or websites or resources, anything with case studies that you know prove it out. My answer, well, there's a book that Leon is showing right now.
Well,
Creating Wealth. But there are a number, and we will get from all of the hosts. We'll get a list of suggested reading that will be up on the website at some point in the next couple of weeks.
And there's a thing called Google. It's loaded.
Bigger Pockets, all that stuff.
Yeah, I suggested Bigger Pockets.
Yeah, Creative Wealth is a book back from the mid '80s, and Robert Allen was one of the big time guys that was into real estate investing, who basically wrote a couple of books that went over a lot of the fundamentals of what we talked about tonight, and then a whole bunch of additional stuff. Carl Weeks is pretty familiar with it, I know, having come from some of the same schools and teachings that I did back in those days. So that would be a starting point. Clearly, a lot of the things we talked in the very beginning, you got to pick and choose where you're gonna use those things at and where they're appropriate. Key piece is they're appropriate when the seller, as Carl has indicated, is the stress, and in situations where there's basically an opening, if you will, where someone can be helped by some of the strategies that we talked about. And it takes a while before you sort of look at those things and say, yeah, it's something that I can do. And you present it to the seller, and if it works, fine. If it doesn't, then you come back and try to generate another solution that fit their situation. So one of the things that I wanted to do, if people don't have any questions at this point, Joe Lababera, we had talked before about your six-figure deal, and I thought that was pretty creative when you were telling me about it. It takes place over a little bit of a time period, but I mean, one of the things that people like to know about is these deals where you are very successful at them, and what were the underlying elements that allowed you to actually do those things and to be successful. So I'll ask you if you could share that with us.
You talk about the one I just did, right? The one I just refied out, the portfolio.
Yep.
About. It was actually it was a big short sale. Steve Peterson did it for me through one of the local banks. I ended up getting 15 properties. I wanted more. There was like 30 of them. I wanted all of them, but they only let me have 15 of them. And the guy that was managing it was also trying to sell it. So he had he wasn't in a rush to sell it because he was making a ton of money on them. And so I ended up settling for about 50 cents on the dollar on each one of these properties. A lot of them were in the suburbs. I bought 15 of them. I got rid of four or five of them at the table. I signed out 2 or 3 of them, and then one I ended up selling back to my lender. Gave me the financing for it. We got all the money for it. It was about $500,000. By the time we were done, I had 9 properties. My mortgage was about $330,000, and they were worth close to $700,000. I ended up getting it refinanced out. And again, it was all financed through private money, private lender. And I just recently refied it out. We closed the refi 3 weeks ago. So from all that, I bought it for I owed $330,000 at the table, and I just had them reappraised. So at the appraisal, now they're worth $1,120,000. I was into it for $330,000. I refied it out. Well, actually, the first time I refied it to pay off my lender, I owed, I think my mortgage balance was somewhere right around 4 and change is what I owed my current lender. A little like $430,000 or something. I did it through Canandaigua National Bank. And the funny thing about it is that the bank that I bought those original 15 from was Canandaigua National Bank. So the same bank that I bought them from at 50 cents on the dollar refinanced me, and I was able to walk away with well over and by the way, my refinancing, I only took out, my mortgage was somewhere right around 50, I think it was 52 or 53% loan to value. And I still walked away with $100,000+ check in my pocket from Canandaigua National Bank. And this was just about 2 weeks ago. So I bought it I owed $330,000, and now they're worth $1,120,000, all from a short sale.
Well, now, Joe.
Awesome job.
Yeah, Joe, if I'm correct, Canandaigua, they don't, back in the day, they wouldn't let you do that cash out, would they?
Well, what happened was that when I first talked to the contact there, he goes, because I asked him if I could do a portfolio loan. They said he can't. And I go, first of all, it's the ones that you guys already have. And he goes, Joe, the bank's not going to sell them to you. I was very nice. I go, we already have a contract. We're going to be closing the deal. He goes, what? I said, yeah. They're letting me buy 15 of them. I wanted all 30 of them. Steve closed it for me when I did it the first time, and then helped me do the refinance the second time on it. And then because he would have done it for this time, but he, Canada National Bank has they're a smaller, they're a local bank. That's one of the few banks that Steve doesn't do stuff with. So, but yeah, they told me no, and now look at it. The same people I bought it for 50 cents on the dollar. Now looking back, I bought it for 25 cents on the dollar because they've grown in value. Is the same bank that actually joyfully and gleefully, whatever the heck this word is, that said, yes, we'll give you a loan on these properties. And I told them, I go, you do realize these are the same properties that I bought from you years ago? Yeah, we know that. Okay, as long as we're good.
Yeah, I mean, the reason why I was making that comment was because I knew that Canada National normally does not do that. They, particularly back in the day, they would just say, no, we're not doing that.
Circumstances, even for a bank.
Yep.
Joe, who bought the other 15?
I don't know. I wanted it to be me.
It's probably Nunzio.
Yeah.
Believe me, I tried for all 30. There was like 33 of them.
There is a question. Leslie would like to know if local banks are more likely to do short sales than national banks.
Good question.
I have found that ES&L is probably the easiest place to do a short sale with. I don't know whether it's because they're local or it's just because they have been so successful over the years that they do very few foreclosures. So when they do have one, they're willing to play.
I've noticed the bigger they are, the slower it is.
Yep. Yeah. That's how come it was easier for me to work with Canada National Bank. I was able to talk to them direct versus the big banks you can't.
9 o'clock already? Well,
9 o'clock already, a couple of minutes to 9. So unless someone has some other questions, I'm going to give it back to Andy and let Andy talk about the Kumo space and whether we're going to do that or not tonight. And so, any other questions? So, thank you everyone for being here. And Andy, go ahead with the Kumo space and the after meeting items.
Sure. So just a couple of announcements. Just update on the website. We spoke briefly about it. Within the next week, you'll have access to this recording of this meeting, as well as all the other general meetings for the last 6 to 8 months. The alternative real estate meetings and housing provider support meetings are already up on YouTube through May of 2020. And we'll have links to those on the REIA.com website next week. If you are seeing our emails, if you've signed up on our website, make sure they're not going to spam. If they are, please whitelist us so you can get it. We're starting to do a new monthly newsletter format that has more information about the meetings, registration links, upcoming information, news articles, some vendor spotlights and other stuff. And our next meeting is next Thursday at this time, 7 p.m. Networking starts at 6:45, and that is Joe Lababera and Scott Spears' Alternative Real Estate Investing Strategies meeting. Kumo Space is a kind of a unique space for doing after meeting networking. You can go there at any time. The website is in the bottom center of your screen. It is kumospace, KUMOSPACE.com/REIA meetings, FFREIA meetings, all one word. You head over there, head into the general meeting networking room, and people will join you there. It is not
Andy?
difficult. Yes, sir.
Before we go to that space, got a quick little reminder from Susan. All 3 or 4 of us forgot the fact that on Saturday, we have the Equity Trust event coming up.
Ah, yes.
And so Equity Trust does self-directed IRAs, and we have a workshop that is, it's not really a workshop. At one point in time, it was going to be. Equity Trust changed that. And basically, that's going to be Saturday from 9:30 to 11 roughly. And what people need to do is they need to go to the website and sign up for that. So just a quick little bit of a sales pitch. I first found out about self-directed IRAs back in 2004-5 type time frame, and said, oh boy, what is this? This is just a piece of stuff I don't really need to deal with. From my personal perspective, it is one of those things that I really wished, and every day I said I should have really got into them and started doing things associated with it earlier. So another way of just saying it's really important that if you really want to understand a different level of real estate investing and a way of doing things, because it's too much to try to go through in this little short period of time, it's something you really, really need to look at, particularly if you are a person who's self-employed and you need to do things like setting up your retirement, then it's something that you really need to start to look at and be very, very serious about what it fits for you or not. I know people who use it for just retirement. I know people who actually do their short sales, and they do short sales, I'm sorry. They actually do their wholesales, and they actually do their wholesales in their self-directed RIAs. And the reason why is because of structured properly, the negative impact of doing one would really just, the difference is just night and day. So consider going to it. You need to go to the website and sign up. And so we mentioned it before, but I just want to make sure that people recognize that that's taking place on Saturday. Back to you, Andy.
Perfect. Well, that was really the last thing. For Kumo Space, just make sure if you're joining, try to join on Chrome. It isn't as friendly with Firefox or Brave or any of those newer browsers. It does okay with Edge. It does not work on tablet browsers, doesn't work on Safari. There is no app for it yet. It's just kind of a cool space. And you can just do it in your browser. And we hope to see you there. Thanks, everybody, for coming. We appreciate you being here. Hopefully you found some value.
Thank you.
Thanks.
See y'all later. Goodbye.
See ya.
Yep. See you over in the Kumo Space.
Good night to all.
Mm-hmm.
Not allowing to click on the Kumo Space.
There, you just got to reopen your chat box, Joe. I just shut the screen share down.
Chat. Perfect.
Okay. See you there.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.